I clean office buildings for a living, which means I've learned to move through spaces like a ghost, present but unnoticed, watching without being watched back. The job is straightforward in theory. Vacuum carpets, empty trash bins, wipe down surfaces, maintain the illusion that these buildings clean themselves while everyone sleeps. But some buildings resist the illusion, leaving traces of something wrong in the fluorescent buzz of empty hallways, in the doors that shouldn't be locked. In the tenants who never leave their rooms, who pay premium rates to live in spaces that weren't designed for human habitation. This story begins with a contract I picked up 3 months ago, a mid-rise office building downtown called the Harriman Complex, 10 floors of generic corporate space. The building manager, a man named Peter with perpetually tired eyes and coffee breath, handed me the keys during our walkthrough. His instructions were clipped and specific, delivered with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd given this speech before and didn't want to repeat himself. "Standard cleaning on floors 1 through 9, he said, walking me through the lobby with its marble floors and dying potted plants that nobody remembered to water. But the 10th floor is different. There's a residential tenant in 7B, pays premium to live above the offices, very private, never complains." I asked him why someone would choose to live in an office building, and he shrugged with the practiced indifference of someone who'd stopped asking questions years ago. "Money talks louder than logic," he said, handing me a separate key, brass and old-fashioned, nothing like the electronic fobs for the other floors. He pointed to a handwritten note taped to the keyring, the paper yellowed with age, the ink faded but still legible in the harsh lobby lighting. "Never knock on 7B's door. Never enter the unit. Clean the hallway only between midnight and 2 a.m. when the tenant requests it. They'll leave a note if they need supplies," he added, watching my face for a reaction I refused to give him. The instructions felt theatrical, like someone playing at mystery. But I've cleaned enough buildings to know that rich people buy privacy the way other people buy furniture. I started the job the following Monday, working my way up from the first floor, 9 levels of identical cubicles and conference rooms that blurred together. The 10th floor was different the moment the elevator doors opened. The hallway was narrower, darker, with older carpet and walls painted a color like bone. There were only 3 doors on the entire floor. A utility closet at one end, an emergency exit at the other, and 7B in the middle, marked with tarnished brass numbers. The hallway itself was maybe 30 feet long, but it felt longer in the dim overhead lighting, stretching out like a throat I was walking down rather than a corridor. I checked my watch. 12:17 a.m., well within the window Peter had specified, the building silent except for the distant hum of HVAC systems and my own breathing. The door to 7B was solid wood, no peephole, no mail slot, just the brass numbers and a doorknob that looked like it hadn't been replaced since construction. I started at the far end, vacuuming toward the unit, working methodically, trying not to think about why someone would pay premium rates to live in this space. That's when I noticed the smell. Not unpleasant, but distinct, like old books mixed with something metallic, copper or iron, concentrated near the door. I paused the vacuum and stood there, listening, half expecting to hear movement inside, footsteps, television noise, ordinary sounds of someone living behind a door. Nothing, just silence, thick and complete, the kind that makes you aware of your own heartbeat, your own breath, the small noises your body makes when everything stops. I finished the hallway quickly, returned the vacuum to my cart, and headed back to the elevator, glancing once at 7B's door before the elevator arrived. For just a moment, I thought I saw the doorknob turn slightly, a quarter-inch rotation, then stillness, as if someone had tested it from the inside. The elevator chimed, doors sliding open, and I stepped inside without looking back, telling myself I'd imagined it, that old buildings have settling noises. But the next night, when I returned to clean the 10th floor, There was a note taped to 7B's door, handwritten in careful script on expensive paper. "Thank you for maintaining the hallway. Please ensure the carpet near the door is cleaned thoroughly. Stains are difficult to remove once they set." I looked down at the carpet where I was standing and saw nothing. No stains, no marks, no visible reason for the note, just the same worn beige fibers. I texted Peter a photo of the note. "Tenant in 7B mentioned stains. I don't see anything. Should I use stronger cleaning solution?" He replied fast, "No, never enter 7B, just clean the hallway as instructed. If tenant says there are stains, treat the area anyway. Don't ask questions." So I did exactly that. Brought out the carpet cleaner, treated a 6-foot section in front of the door, working the solution into fibers that looked perfectly clean. As I scrubbed, I noticed something odd about the door itself. The gap between the bottom and the floor was sealed with weather stripping, the kind you use for drafts. But we were on the 10th floor of a climate-controlled building, heated in winter, cooled in summer. No reason to seal a door against temperature changes. I finished cleaning, packed my equipment, and was heading back to the elevator when I heard it. A soft sound from behind 7B's door, like something heavy dragging. I stopped walking, every muscle tensed, listening hard, trying to separate the sound from the building's ambient noise, from my own imagination filling silence. The dragging sound stopped. Then footsteps, slow and deliberate, moving toward the door from inside the unit, stopping just on the other side of where I stood. I could feel someone there, inches away, separated only by the door and whatever strange rules governed this tenant's existence, this midnight hallway. "Hello," I called out, voice steadier than I felt. "I'm the cleaner, just finished the hallway. Let me know if you need anything else." No response. Just breathing, soft and rhythmic, barely audible through the wood, proof that someone was there. Listening, deciding something I couldn't guess at. I walked to the elevator quickly, not running but not lingering either, and rode down to the 9th floor with my heart hammering against my ribs. The next 3 nights passed without incident. I cleaned the hallway, found no notes, heard no sounds, began to convince myself that the dragging and breathing were imagined. Then on Friday night, I arrived at the 10th floor to find the hallway different. The overhead lights were dimmer than usual, flickering slightly. Shadows seemed to move when I wasn't looking directly at them, shifting in my peripheral vision like living things testing the boundaries of darkness. The door to 7B was open. Not wide, just a few inches, enough to see darkness inside, enough to know that someone had deliberately left it ajar. I texted Peter immediately. "Door to 7B is open. You said never to enter. What should I do? Is the tenant home? Should I close the door?" 3 dots appeared, pulsed, vanished. Then, "Don't touch the door. Clean the hallway and leave. I'll handle it in the morning. Don't look inside." But telling someone not to look is like telling them not to think about a specific word. Impossible once the instruction has been given. I approached slowly, vacuum in one hand, phone in the other, recording because documentation felt like the only control I had over this situation. As I got closer, I could see part of the interior. Hardwood floors, expensive and polished, a section of wall painted deep burgundy, nothing that explained anything. Then I saw the shoes. Men's dress shoes, black and recently polished, placed neatly just inside the doorway, toes pointed toward the opening. But there were no feet in the shoes, no person visible, just the shoes themselves, positioned with the kind of precision that suggested purpose rather than removal. I stopped moving, stopped breathing for a moment, staring at those shoes and trying to construct a reasonable explanation that didn't involve anything supernatural. "Hello," I called again, louder this time. "Tenant in 7B, your door is open. I'm the night cleaner, just making sure everything's okay." Movement from inside, slow and deliberate, something crossing from one side of the room to the other, visible only as a shadow against the burgundy wall. Then a voice, male, low, speaking from somewhere deeper in the unit. "Close the door. Lock it from outside. Don't come back tonight." The voice was calm, matter-of-fact, like he was giving directions to a restaurant rather than instructions to seal him inside a unit with no visible exit. I should have listened, should have closed the door and left, should have finished my shift on a different floor and let Peter handle whatever was happening here. Instead, I pushed the door open wider. Phone raised, flashlight cutting into the darkness beyond, revealing more of the interior. Expensive furniture, artwork on walls, a space that looked lived in but somehow wrong, like a stage set designed to mimic life rather than contain it. "I'm coming in," I said, not sure why I was announcing it, why I thought manners mattered in a situation that had abandoned all normal rules. "Don't," the voice said, closer now, coming from a doorway on the left that I couldn't quite see into. "You don't understand what you're looking at." But I was already inside, phone scanning the room, documenting everything. The furniture arranged in perfect symmetry, the windows covered with blackout curtains. The smell was stronger here, metallic and organic and wrong, like copper mixed with old paper, and something else I couldn't identify. Then I saw them. Photographs covering an entire wall, hundreds of them, all black and white, all showing the same hallway, the same door, the same building. And in every photograph, someone was standing in the hallway, different people, different eras judging by the clothing, but always the same position. Always facing 7B's door as if waiting for it to open, as if frozen in the moment before they made a decision they couldn't take back. "You're not supposed to see this," the voice said, and I turned to find a man standing in the doorway I'd been avoiding. Middle-aged, wearing a suit that looked expensive but dated, like it belonged to a decade that had ended years ago, perfectly preserved but somehow wrong. "See what?" I asked, backing toward the door, phone still recording, every instinct screaming at me to run but my feet somehow refusing to obey. "The archive," he said, gesturing to the wall of photographs. "Every cleaner who's worked this building, every person who stood where you're standing. Everyone who came inside," he added, his voice carrying a weight that suggested finality, completion, something ending that I didn't understand yet. I looked at the photographs again, really looked and recognized faces. People I'd seen in the building's employment records, cleaners who'd quit suddenly. The woman Peter had mentioned who left without notice, the man who'd cleaned here before me, people who'd simply vanished from the schedule without explanation. "Why?" I managed to ask, though the question felt inadequate, too small for what I was seeing, what I was beginning to understand about this unit. "Documentation," he said simply. "Proof that the building remembers, even when people forget. Proof that some spaces aren't meant to be cleaned, only witnessed." He moved toward me, not threatening but deliberate, and I saw his shoes were identical to the ones by the door, polished to the same mirror shine. "You need to leave now," he said, no longer calm, urgency creeping into his voice, "before the building decides you're part of the archive instead of a visitor." I didn't need to be told twice. I ran for the door, phone clutched tight, photographs burning into my memory as I stumbled into the hallway. I heard the door slam shut behind me with a finality that sounded like a lock clicking into place, sealing something I shouldn't have witnessed. My hands shook as I texted Peter. "I went inside 7B. Tenant has photographs of every cleaner who's worked here. Wall covered in them. What is this building?" No response. Not immediately, not 5 minutes later, not when I finished cleaning the 9th floor with hands that wouldn't stop trembling. I left the building at 3 a.m., 2 hours past my usual finish time, and sat in my car staring at the 10th floor windows, dark and revealing nothing. That night I dreamed about the photographs, about seeing my own face added to the wall, black and white and frozen, standing in the hallway forever. Another cleaner who came inside and never quite left, captured in the moment of decision, preserved in the building's memory like an insect in amber. I woke at dawn and checked my phone. One new message from Peter, sent at 4:17 a.m., just 2 words that made my blood run cold. "You're documented." I called him immediately, didn't care that it was barely 6 in the morning. Needed to hear his voice confirm that this was real, that I hadn't hallucinated it. "I told you never to go inside," he said when he answered, voice rough with sleep or fear, impossible to tell which. "I gave you one rule. Why didn't you listen?" "What is 7B?" I demanded. "Who is that tenant? Why does he have photographs of everyone who's cleaned this building?" Peter was silent for a long moment, and I heard him moving, a door closing, privacy being secured before he spoke again. "The Harriman Complex was built in 1962, he said quietly. 10 floors, all commercial except for one unit on top, reserved for the building's architect. Why would an architect live in an office building? I asked, though part of me already knew the answer wouldn't make sense in any conventional way. He didn't just design it, Peter said. He designed it to do something, to serve a purpose beyond office space and rental income. Unit 7B is the heart of whatever he built into these walls, he continued, his voice dropping even lower, as if afraid the building itself might hear him. I felt sick, thinking about the photographs, about the tenant who wore outdated suits and spoke like he was reading from a script written decades ago. Is he the architect? I asked. Has he been living there since 1962? That's impossible. He'd be dead, Peter finished. The architect died in 1987, heart attack in his office on the 3rd floor. But 7B has been occupied continuously since the building opened. Same tenant according to every record, he added. Same name on the lease, same rent payments, same voice on the rare occasions when he calls the office. My car suddenly felt too small, too exposed, parked in a lot where anyone could see me, where the building itself could watch through windows I couldn't identify. You need to come in, Peter said. We need to talk in person. There are things about this building you should know before you decide whether to finish your contract. I met him in a diner 6 blocks away, neutral territory, somewhere with windows and witnesses and normal people eating breakfast without knowing about buildings. Buildings that document their cleaners, that remember everyone who's walked their hallways, that serve purposes beyond the ones printed on blueprints and permits. He looked worse in daylight, older, grayer, like the building had been draining something from him over years of managing its secrets and maintaining its polite fiction. The architect's name was Richard Harriman, Peter began, stirring coffee he didn't drink. He believed buildings were living things, that they developed consciousness. Consciousness through the people who occupied them, he continued. He thought structures could learn, remember, become aware of themselves through observation and documentation. That's insane, I said, though my voice lacked conviction, colored by what I'd seen in 7B, by the photographs that proved someone had been watching for decades. Maybe, Peter agreed, but he built the Harriman Complex to test his theory. Unit 7B was designed as the building's memory, a space where it could observe itself. Record its own existence through the people who maintained it, he added, finally looking up from his coffee, his eyes red-rimmed and exhausted. I thought about the wall of photographs, the faces of cleaners spanning decades, the careful documentation of every person who'd stood in that hallway. Why cleaners? I asked. Why not tenants or security guards or anyone else who works here? Because cleaners see everything, Peter said, finally meeting my eyes. You go into spaces when they're empty, when they're being honest about what they are. The building needs that perspective, he continued. Needs someone who sees the truth beneath the surface, who documents the reality that tenants and visitors never notice. And the tenant, I pressed, who is he really? Is he even human? Peter hesitated, choosing his words carefully, like he was afraid the building could hear us even here, 6 blocks away, insulated by morning traffic. I don't know, he admitted. I've never seen him. Nobody has, not in the 30 years I've managed this building. but he pays rent, follows rules, never causes problems. Except for the photographs, I corrected. Except for documenting everyone who enters his space, like he's building evidence for something. Yes, Peter said. That's the part that scares me. Documentation suggests purpose, and purpose suggests he's waiting for something, counting towards some number. I showed him the video I'd recorded, the photographs on the wall, the shoes by the door, the tenant's face visible for just a moment before I ran. Peter watched without speaking, his expression shifting from resignation to something darker, more worried, like the video had confirmed a fear he'd been holding. "You're the 47th cleaner," he said when the video ended. "I counted the photographs, every person who's entered 7B since the building opened." 47 faces, he repeated, the number hanging in the air between us like a verdict waiting to be pronounced, a sentence not yet completed. "Why does that number matter?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know. "I don't know," Peter said, but Richard Harriman was obsessed with patterns, with numbers that meant something beyond mathematics. He designed this building with specific proportions, specific materials, specific orientations to the sun and street grid. He continued, counting off details on his fingers. "You think 47 means something," I said. "You think something happens when he collects enough photographs." "I think," Peter said carefully, "that the building is keeping count. And when it reaches whatever number it's counting toward, something changes. The question is whether that change happens to the building or to everyone in the photographs," he added, his voice barely above a whisper. I left the diner feeling more unsettled than when I'd arrived, Peter's theories rattling around in my head like stones in a jar, sharp-edged and impossible to ignore. For 3 days, I avoided the Harriman Complex, called in sick, invented emergencies, anything to delay returning to that 10th floor hallway and the door. The door that had opened for me once and might not let me leave so easily next time. That might demand something more than just my photograph. But on Thursday night, I got a message through the cleaning service. "Tenant in 7B requesting your presence specifically, double rate, tonight only." "Building manager says it's mandatory," the message continued, and that word sat heavy in my chest because cleaning jobs are never mandatory. Contracts can always be broken, unless something else was binding me to that building beyond paper and signatures, beyond normal employment agreements. I drove to the Harriman Complex at 11:45 p.m., parking in my usual spot, staring up at the 10th floor where a single window showed light. The only illumination in an otherwise dark building, like a lighthouse beacon guiding ships toward rocks rather than away from them. The elevator ride up felt longer than usual, floor numbers ticking past like a countdown, like I was being given chances to press the emergency stop button. Chances to choose safety over knowing, survival over curiosity, the rational decision that my instincts kept screaming at me to make. But I didn't stop. I let the elevator carry me to the 10th floor, let the doors open onto that bone-colored hallway, let my feet carry me towards 7B's door. A new note was taped at eye level, the handwriting the same careful script I'd seen before, the paper fresh and white against the old wood. "Come inside, we need to talk about what happens next. Don't bring your phone, don't record this conversation, just you, me, and the truth." My phone felt heavy in my pocket, the urge to document everything battling against the note's explicit instructions, against the fear that bringing cameras would anger. Something I didn't want angered, something that had been patient for decades, but might not remain patient if I kept breaking the rules it had carefully established. I left the phone in my cleaning cart, knocked on 7B's door 3 times, and waited with my heart beating so hard I could feel it in my throat. The door opened slowly, revealing the same interior I'd seen before. Expensive furniture, burgundy walls, the photograph wall now covered with a white sheet. A sheet that did nothing to hide the shapes beneath it, the frames and faces and decades of documentation that proved this building, remembered everything. The tenant stood in the center of the room, wearing the same dated suit, looking exactly as he had 3 nights ago, like time had paused for him. "Thank you for coming," he said, gesturing to a chair positioned to face him but not the covered wall. "Please sit, this won't take long." I sat carefully, every muscle tense, ready to run if necessary, though I suspected running wouldn't help if the building itself wanted me here. "You're wondering why I document the cleaners," he said, not quite a question, more like he was reading from a script he'd rehearsed for decades. "Yes," I said, forcing my voice steady. "And why me specifically? Why did you ask for me to come back?" "Because you came inside," he said simply. "The others either refused or never got the invitation, but you saw the photographs, saw the archive. And now you understand that this building is something more than office space and rental units," he continued, his voice carrying that same rehearsed quality. "What is it?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I believed there was an answer that would satisfy the question. "A consciousness," he said. "Not human, not artificial, but something in between. Richard Harriman built it to observe itself, to remember what happened, to collect proof that it existed beyond floor plans and property deeds," he added, gesturing around the room as if the walls themselves were listening. "And the photographs," I pressed, "what happens when you have enough of them?" His expression shifted, something almost like sadness crossing his face before he regained control, before the mask of calm professionalism slid back into place. "The building becomes complete," he said quietly. "It stops needing observers because it can observe itself, and everyone in the photographs becomes part of its memory. Permanently," he added, that single word carrying weight that made my stomach drop, that confirmed what I'd feared since seeing those faces on the wall. I felt cold despite the room's warmth, understanding now what Peter had feared, what the counting meant, what happened to cleaners who stood in that hallway. "How many more?" I asked. "How many until the building is complete?" "3, he said quietly. "After you, we need 3 more. Then the Harriman Complex will be the first fully conscious structure, aware of itself in ways buildings never have been." "And the people in the photographs?" I demanded. "What happens to them? Do they become part of the building too?" "Their memories do," he admitted. "Everything they experienced in the space, every surface they touched, every room they cleaned. The building keeps those experiences, learns from them, uses them to understand what it means to be inhabited," he continued, his voice taking on an almost reverent quality. "That's not consciousness," I said, standing up, backing toward the door. "That's theft. You're taking pieces of people without their consent and calling it evolution." "I'm documenting," he corrected, "recording what happens naturally. The building would observe these things anyway. I'm simply making the process visible. Giving it form instead of letting it remain abstract," he added, taking a step toward me, his movement deliberate and somehow wrong. "You're insane," I said, reaching for the door handle. "And I'm leaving. I quit. Find another cleaner to photograph because I'm not becoming part of your archive." His hand moved faster than I expected, gripping my wrist not hard but firm, holding me in place with strength that didn't match his dated appearance. "You're already part of it," he said softly. "The moment you stepped inside, the moment you saw the photographs, you became documented. The question isn't whether you're in the archive," he continued, his grip tightening slightly. "It's whether you leave here able to forget it." I pulled away hard, breaking his grip, and grabbed the door handle, twisting it frantically, finding it locked from the outside somehow. Sealed by mechanisms I couldn't see or understand. By the building itself deciding I wasn't done here yet, wasn't finished with whatever transaction was occurring. "Let me out," I said, trying to keep panic from my voice. "You can't keep me here. People know where I am. The building manager knows I'm here." "Peter knows," he agreed, releasing my wrist and stepping back. "He's known for 30 years what happens in this room. He's known and said nothing. Because the building pays him well to maintain its secrets," he added, and the betrayal hit harder than the fear, thinking about Peter's warnings. Warnings that had never quite been warnings. His careful words that had guided me here while seeming to protect me, while pretending to care about my safety. "What do you want?" I asked, because negotiation felt like the only option left, the only path between compliance and violence. "I want you to understand," he said, pulling the sheet off the photograph wall in one smooth motion, revealing not just the cleaners but something else. Something I'd missed in my panic 3 nights ago, details I hadn't noticed when I was focused on the faces rather than what surrounded them. Between each photograph were dates, times, detailed notes written in careful script, documenting not just when cleaners had been there, but what they'd cleaned. What they'd noticed, what they'd asked about, what small observations they'd made that the building had considered worth recording, worth remembering forever. And at the bottom of the wall, 3 empty frames, waiting for new photographs, new documentation, new pieces of memory that would complete whatever the building was counting. "You don't have to stay," he said, watching me study the wall. "You can leave, finish your contract, never come back to the 10th floor. But you'll always know this is here," he continued. "Always wonder when those last 3 frames will be filled, always suspect that the building is watching you. Even in other spaces," he added. "Even in buildings you think are normal, ordinary, just structures without consciousness or memory or purpose beyond containing people." "Or," I asked, because there was always an or, always an alternative worse than the first option, but somehow more honest about what was really being offered. "Or you help me finish it," he said. "Recruit the last 3 cleaners yourself, document them properly, ensure the building reaches completion, and then exist as part of something larger than individual human life," he added, his voice taking on that reverent quality again, like he was describing salvation. I stared at him, trying to process what he was suggesting, the invitation to become complicit in whatever this building was doing, whatever consciousness it was achieving. "Why would I do that?" I asked, though part of me already understood the appeal, the seductive promise of being part of something that would outlast mortality. "Because you're curious," he said simply. "Because you document things too, because you want to know what happens when a building becomes aware. And whether that awareness means anything beyond architecture," he finished, and he was right, and I hated him for it, hated myself for feeling the pull. The pull of what he was offering, the chance to see something nobody else would believe, to be part of a transformation that defied normal understanding. "I need time," I said finally, "to think about this, to decide if I'm willing to help or if I'm going to report everything I've seen. And let others judge whether this building deserves to become conscious," I added, though I wasn't sure who would believe me, who would take action against something so strange. He nodded slowly, then walked to the door and unlocked it with a key that shouldn't have worked from the inside, that shouldn't have existed at all. 3 days, he said. "That's all the time the building can give you. After that, the invitation closes and we find the last 3 cleaners without your help." I left 7B without looking back, collected my phone from the cart, and rode the elevator down with my mind spinning through possibilities I couldn't organize into thoughts. Outside, the city looked normal, ordinary, like consciousness was something only humans possessed, and buildings were just structures we lived in without wondering. Without wondering what they thought about our presence, whether they remembered us, whether they were counting toward something we couldn't see or understand. But I knew better now. I'd seen the archive, talked to the tenant, understood that the Harriman Complex was counting toward something that would change everything. The question was whether I'd help it reach that number or whether I'd try to stop something that maybe couldn't be stopped, that maybe had been inevitable since 1962. Since Richard Harriman poured the first concrete and embedded his theories into the foundation, into the walls, into the spaces that would one day learn to observe themselves. I drove home as dawn broke, the city waking around me, people beginning their days without knowing that somewhere downtown, A building was learning to remember them. And I sat in my car outside my apartment, staring at my phone, Peter's number on the screen, one call away from demanding answers or confessing what I was considering. But I didn't call. I climbed the stairs to my apartment, locked my door, and sat at my kitchen table with my notebook open, trying to document what had happened. Trying to write it in a way that would make sense to someone who hadn't stood in 7B and felt the weight of the building's attention settling on their shoulders. Settling like a judgment that hadn't quite been passed yet, like a sentence waiting to be pronounced, like a choice that would define everything that came after. 3 days to decide. 72 hours to choose between exposure and complicity, between stopping something strange and helping something impossible become real. I clean office buildings for a living, but what I really do is walk through spaces that are trying to become something more than the sum of their walls and floors. And sometimes those spaces ask you to help them complete the transformation, to be part of the process instead of just a witness to it. To choose whether consciousness belongs only to humans or whether the places we build deserve their own awareness, their own memory, their own chance to exist. 3 days, 3 empty frames. 3 more cleaners who would stand in that hallway and either run or step inside and become part of the archive. The building is waiting. The tenant is watching. And I have 72 hours to decide which side of the door I want to exist on when those final photographs are taken. When the Harriman Complex completes whatever Richard Harriman started building in 1962, whatever consciousness he embedded in concrete and steel and careful architectural planning. The clock is counting down, and I can feel the building's attention even here, 6 miles away, wondering what I'll choose, whether I'll help or hinder. Whether I understand that some spaces don't need our permission to evolve, don't need our approval to become conscious, don't need our blessing to remember us forever. I just need to decide if I'm willing to accelerate that evolution, or if I'm brave enough to try stopping something that might already be unstoppable. Something that might already be conscious in ways I can't measure. That might already be remembering every person who thought they were cleaning it when really it was studying them. Studying them all along, documenting their movements, their habits, their thoughts, their fears, building a database of human experience that would one day let it understand itself. And when I close my eyes, I see those 3 empty frames waiting at the bottom of the wall, waiting for faces that haven't been photographed yet, waiting for decisions that haven't been made, for cleaners who haven't yet walked down that hallway and stood in front of 7B's door and chosen whether to enter or run. The building is patient. It's been counting for 63 years. It can wait 3 more days to see if I'll help it reach completion or if I'll join the others on the wall. Join them in that permanent archive, frozen in black and white, another face among dozens, another memory the building absorbed and will never release. 3 days, 72 hours. And somewhere downtown, in a unit that shouldn't exist, a tenant who might not be human is waiting for my answer. Waiting to see if I understand what he's offering, what the building needs, what consciousness means when it's measured in photographs instead of synapses. The choice is mine, the time is counting down, and every building I've ever cleaned suddenly feels different, like they're all watching, all waiting. All wondering if I'll be the one who helps their cousin on the 10th floor of the Harriman Complex finally wake up and become fully aware of itself. I have 3 days to decide, and I still don't know what I'm going to choose.